Warning, listening to this show may result in increased levels of inspiration, motivation, and innovation. Side effects can include the immediate urge to take massive action to build a better business and life for yourself and others. You've been warned. Welcome to Influencers Radio with your host, Jack Mize.
Success has made a failure of our home. Sinead O'Connor, I believe. That song, More Money, More Problems, the Notorious B.I.G. The theme song from Growing Pains, Alan Thicke, Kirk Cameron. Actually, maybe that's a bad example. But what is it about growing pains, success, and the irony that that can actually cause problems, introduce problems into our lives, success in business? And sometimes we don't even recognize them as what happens, points in success. I call them symptoms of success. Symptoms of success. A lot of people think of symptoms as being symptoms of something bad, of an illness, and it can be symptoms of success. There's a point in almost any entrepreneur's journey that when they start getting traction, they start becoming successful, they are what would seem obvious they're going to hit roadblocks. They're going to have problems introduced that maybe they didn't consider. And instead of thinking that this is, or recognizing it as a symptom of success, that this means that I'm on the right track, they think that, it's a roadblock. Here it comes. Here comes the plateau. Here comes the stagnation. Here comes the beginning of the end. And it's not, and it doesn't have to be. And today, our guest, Lynne Jacob, is a very smart lady that identifies these symptoms of success, and not only identifies them, but helps businesses, helps entrepreneurs get past them, helps them recognize them, understand that it's not something unique that's happening to them, and understand that it's part of growing and that there are solutions. She's been there. She's helped somebody do it, and she brings back a map. So if you are an entrepreneur, if you've started in a business and you think you've hit a roadblock, you think that things are going wrong, new problems that you didn't think that were going to occur, didn't anticipate are happening, it might not be the beginning of the end. It might be the beginning of your next level of growth. So stick around, find out if you're experiencing those symptoms of success. We'll be right back.
Don't miss a thing. Listen to and download past episodes, get show notes, resource lists, and leave feedback at influencersradio.com.
And we're back on Influencers Radio, and today I have with me a lady that actually, she helps businesses that are successful solve problems that they think are problems, but are really, to me, symptoms of success. Symptoms of success. Boy, that sounds like a catchphrase. Anyway, today we have Lynne Jacob. She's the creator of the Trade Contractors Business College, author of I Know You Know, But You Don't Understand. And she's also the founder of MLJ International, where she's a turnaround expert. We're going to find out exactly what that is for entrepreneurs, business owners, throughout Canada, the U.S., Europe, Australia. Lynne, welcome to Influencers Radio.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Well, I'm glad you are here because you were going to talk about some things that is almost the elephant in the room with a lot of businesses. I think if you got together a room full of successful entrepreneurs, right? And when I say successful, I mean people that have gotten to the place where they thought they wanted to get to, but they're starting to encounter symptoms or growing pains that is necessary for businesses to go through that maybe they didn't plan on. Right? And they may think that they're heading in the wrong direction, but in fact, it's the right direction. And that's where this turnaround expert comes in. First thing I want to know is, what is a turnaround expert?
Well, as you just mentioned, Jack, these guys are, they've got their business to a certain level, and then they kind of get stuck with another problem, and they start struggling, and they're just not sure what next to do. So when I'm working with owners of businesses that are at a level like that, I know that they're at a certain stage in their business. In fact, when I'm first having a chat with somebody, because they've come to know what I do or how I help businesses like theirs, then I ask them what their biggest problem is. And that tells me which stage they're at in their business. So, regardless of what the problem is, it just means that your business is successful to that level, and now it's time to go on to the next level.
And that's the thing. And I think maybe a lot of businesses don't recognize these growing pains of success. And, let's start with the facts, right? So these stats, and these have been the stats, it doesn't seem like they've changed over, I don't know, the last probably decades, is that only 1 in every 100 businesses makes it to year 10. Now, a lot of people may find that staggering or almost depressing at times, but you also have to take and consider what people can, call starting a business, right? There's a lot of different levels of what people call starting a business. But the ones that do make it, they're the ones that obviously are the ones that should be in business and are, doing the right things. What happens is, it seems like from our discussions is it's about, what is it, the 5 or 7 year mark that they're in business that they look around and realize this isn't what I thought was going to happen when I own my business. When I first started a business, I romanticized it being fun and freedom and the entrepreneurial dream, but it's missing the fun, right? Do you find that to be a symptom? One of the most common things with businesses that, by all other accounts, people look at them and think that they're on a successful track, but when they look at it themselves internally, that's what's.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I've been finding that, in the beginning years of a business, their biggest challenge is money, right? And then they get to a point where they have the work coming in, but now their biggest problem isn't money anymore. It's become time. But they're still working from the same thought patterns or paradigms, if you will, as they did when they first started their business. So by about the 5-year mark, they're telling me that it's not as much fun as it used to be. Well, no, because now they've got, more business, which is great. They've got more money, but now they don't have enough time. So it's cutting into their family time and their personal life, and it's just become all about the business.
I think that's one of the most common things I've seen with entrepreneurs and people who have started their business, that it's almost a double-edged sword. What is a tremendous benefit or attribute when they started the business becomes a tremendous, almost, what would the word be? It stifles. It's the impediment for their business in that when they start, they know how to do these things. They know how to be the technician and, the business owner. A lot of, I think about, guys that are doing marketing or online stuff. One of the benefits they have when they're beginning is they know how to program a website or something like that. And that is a business, that is a benefit for them getting started. They're starting lean. But what happens is as it grows, they still do that stuff because they know how to do it. It's almost like it's a blessing when you begin your business, but it's a curse when you start getting more customers because you're doing all the stuff that you shouldn't be doing. And am I correct in the assumption that that's where that time comes in, that they're still doing that?
Mm-hmm. And, I did the same thing in my business. When I first started, my technician hat was being a coach, and I was a kick-ass coach. So that was great. But I was doing everything else as well, all the administrative stuff and all of the entrepreneurial stuff, right, of marketing and selling and that sort of thing. And then it came down to where I was crunched for time. And it's not easy, but you absolutely have to delegate these tasks that can be done well enough by other people. And yeah, you're going to train them to do that, but that's the only way you're going to get more time. So you get to the point where you're making the money, which means you have more business, but now you don't have the time. And it's hard to let go of some of those tasks because you're so good at them.
It is. So to give people some specifics, some examples, one that comes to me is I remember a restaurant owner once told me the biggest problem in the restaurant business is that that people start a restaurant and they can't stay out of the kitchen. And he says there's absolutely no way that you can grow a, 6-7 figure restaurant by doing a $10 an hour job by
Absolutely.
cooking in the kitchen. And I know that when you started out, you've worked with a lot of different types of businesses, but one of the ones that really stuck out for me that you seem to help folks a lot is in the construction business. So just to give a face to this, so people, and really any type of business works, but we're not talking about, high end, highbrow stuff, as far as, authors or celebrities or anything like that. We're talking about brick and mortar, people that are working, breaking their backs every day, construction. And that's a business that you've had just tremendous success in turning these types of businesses around. What is it that you've seen in that type of business, or the problems that they've had that specifically around that money and that time? Because this really does seem to be stages of success in a business. And we'll talk about the people part that we discussed earlier, but what is it that you see that they've faced and overcome to grow the way that they should, of the way they imagined when they started their business?
Well, I mean, this is perfect. So let's take this small business that I'm thinking of right now. They went through, they didn't have a lot of money, so they opened their business. So it's a heating and air conditioning contracting business. Opened it from the basement of their home is where the office was. So that's where the wife worked, was in the basement of their home. And they had a garage that they stopped parking in because that became their shop where they kept all their supplies, right? So in the beginning, it was just the husband. He was the contractor, but he was also the technician out there doing, installing furnaces and air conditioners, that sort of thing. So then he had to hire some people, right? Because he had to leverage his time. He got too many clients. He couldn't do all the work himself. So now he's making more money and he ran out of time. So he had to hire people. And the biggest thing with him is that when he hired these people, he kept hiring more people as he needed them. I think he got up to about 6, still working out of their home.
Wow.
So now what became the problem, again, as he was growing, was money, because the more people he hired, the more money he had to pay out. And it was costing him a lot of time having these guys constantly running back to his home shop because they weren't in town, right? Where, it's the hub of the wheel and everybody going out from there. So it got into a money issue. And so then he got back on the tools to make more money. So now he's crunched for time. So it's like a wheel, and you keep going back around them. Money, time, and people. Money, time, and people. So then when we were first working together, we spent like a half day in an intensive coaching session. And what he needed, I remember this so well because I said, if I were a doctor, the prescription I'd be writing out for you right now is for you to take a vacation immediately. And they said, we already had a vacation this year, like 4 months earlier. He was exhausted. And his exhaustion was coming from all of these employees he now had still working out of his home shop. And they were wasting time. They were creating callbacks, which is when they don't do the job properly the first time. And then he gets to pay for the callback, which cuts back into the money. So the first thing he needed was some time to be able to think. But he couldn't have that because he was exhausted and burnt out. So I recommended they take a vacation. And believe it or not, they did. Within 2 weeks, they took a vacation, just him and his wife, went away, drank a little extra just so that he could stop thinking about stuff, comes back, immediately hires a guy and buys a shop downtown immediately.
It's remarkable how little moments like that can make such a huge difference. When you talked about this wheel, I think about it as the entrepreneur's hamster wheel, right? And,
I love that. Yeah,
and
it is.
I've seen so many people that have gone on this hamster wheel, yet they thrash back and forth. They'll hire a bunch of people, and then they realize that in order to pay those people, they have to get more customers. And in order to fulfill those customers, they have to hire more people and or do it themselves. And it just becomes, the self just growing, where they can't jump off. But then all of a sudden one day, rather than take a vacation like you would prescribe, they said, nope, I'm going to fire everybody and go back to doing it myself. That was easier, which does nothing, I guess, but just start the whole thing all over again. And I can tell you, and even from my own experience, as an entrepreneur, when things are in motion like that, when there's so many things going on, and probably the one thing that is needed more than anything, like you said, was that vacation. I always say that relaxation stresses me out. And I know that's really a symptom of this entrepreneur's hamster wheel. So what is it? How did you convince him to do that? Because I can guarantee you there's a lot of people listening to this that are in that situation, in that position, and they want to know, how do I justify that? What is it that, what will happen? I feel like everything's going to fall apart if I do that. What would you say to them?
Well, so for one client who had never taken a week's vacation, not true, hadn't taken a true vacation for an entire week and had only taken that one, joke of a vacation in 6 years. They started with long weekends. So actually they started with playing hooky, is what they called it. They felt like they were playing hooky. It was, I think, a Thursday night conference in a big city that was 3-hour drive away. So they left at noon or something like that. So they went into the business, made sure everything was going well, took off, spent the night at the concert, slept in the morning, nice long leisurely brunch, that sort of thing. And then they hit the road. It was about 1 maybe in the afternoon, or must have been noon. And they checked in by cell phone on their way back. No fires, none. So they got in, they got to the office, they checked in, everything's just fine. So then that gave them courage to take a long weekend. So then what they did is they took off a little early on a Thursday, were gone all day Friday and the weekend, and, they went somewhere, I forget. And then it grew into 5-day weekends, and then a full week. And then it just kept growing and growing. So, one of the things also is people say, I can't afford to take holidays financially. Well, you can't afford not to, because like this heating contractor I mentioned a minute ago, he was burned out. I mean, he was going to get sick, because that's what happens with all this stress, is we get sick. And we're the backbone of this company. So if we're sick and the backbone's not healthy, what's the rest of the body or the company feel like? So that's the biggest thing that I help people identify, is what's going to happen if they get sick, because they don't see that they have the finances to afford it.
Yeah, well, that's the one thing that's probably out of their control. They can control whether they go on a vacation. They can control hiring and firing. But the one thing they can't, or they don't think they control, is what's going to happen to them. If they work themselves into the ground. One of the things. So you've identified these three kind of phases, and I call them. When I first saw these and talked about them, I thought about them as symptoms of success, where a lot of people, when they're starting their business, they think it's a problem. They think it's an obstacle that they're hitting. But in reality, it's just a symptom that any successful business will go through and just has to overcome to go to the next level. It means that you've made it around the board once. Now it's time to, add a piece and keep growing. So for a new business, when it's money, if money is the issue, that's something that I guess is really, it's a variable that really depends on the business, on what their finances are. I've seen businesses that depend on cash flow. They could be millions of dollars in debt, but as long as the cash is flowing, they are fine, or at least they think they're fine. But then I think what's really important, when people do get past that and get to that success, and it's the time. And so what is it that you find are the biggest obstacles for people to let go and hire people? Because I think the biggest thing people face is, how am I going to find somebody to do it the way that I would do it, or as well as I would do it, or care as much as I do it? Because I've always seen the dilemma that people have is, if I hire someone that cares enough or has the entrepreneurial spirit like I do, they're not going to stick around long as they go on to do their own thing. But if I hire someone that has the employee mentality, they're all they're looking for is how to do it good enough and quick enough so they can go on and enjoy their weekend and day. You know, what are some of those symptoms, or what are some of the things that you help folks get over when it comes to hiring people, not just hiring people, but hiring the right people?
That's a great one. Hiring the right people. Hire for attitude. Everything else you can train. Now, they have to have a certain level of aptitude, the ability to learn, but everything else you can train them on. But if their attitude sucks, well, you're not going to change that. They can, but you're not going to, insist that they change that and succeed. So hire for attitude. And I'll tell you, every time I'm working with a client and I've heard that they're having problems with somebody they just hired, a chiropractor comes to mind. She hired this person for this particular position. And then I asked her when she was having problems within a few months. Then I asked her about the very first interview she had with that person. And I asked her what it was like, what did she feel her attitude was like? And she said, I never thought about it. But that was exactly it. She had this kind of holier than thou attitude where she was, the greatest thing since sliced bread for me to hire. And she got me to believe it. And I did. So that's the biggest one, is to hire for attitude. Now, I have said, and I have seen, and I've said many a time, that the hardest thing for, a self-employed person, a business owner who's growing his business or her business, the hardest thing for them to do is hand the reins over to their employees. Yes. And they'll get a lot of nods, from people. And so then I asked, so why is that? Is it because the person isn't competent or isn't trustworthy? Ah, yeah. So one fellow heard, this presentation one day, and then a few months later, I'm at another place where he is, and he comes over and talks to me, and he said, when I asked him that question, he instantly knew that he couldn't trust his key person. So then what he did, and sadly, but what he did is he paid close attention to see if he was right or wrong, and he found out that he was right. That's why he was holding himself back from handing over the reins, from training him on all this stuff, because he just felt that he wasn't trustworthy, and sure enough, he wasn't. So he released him, hired somebody else for attitude, trained him, and to this day, that's been many years, and I just happened to see that fellow a few weeks ago at another conference, and to this day, he's still remembering that and reminding himself of it. So it's all about hiring for attitude. You can train them to do it lots well enough. It may not be as good as you do it, but you don't have the time to do that anymore. So too many people are doing things that can be done lots well enough by others.
Yeah, I love that. Attitude over aptitude, I think. Mm-hmm. That should be a formula. That sounds like Einstein, the attitude over aptitude formula. Now, I'm going to tell you, Lynne, you left me on a bit of a cliffhanger here, and I have to go back to it. The business that you talked about how he left his vacation, he came back immediately, and what did he do? He got a shop, moved shop out of the house, right? Mm-hmm. And so I want you to finish that, and I want you to also kind of give, let us know, some other examples or if you've seen that's a common thread amongst the people that you worked with when they finally get it, when they get it. And I think that right there brings us back to your book, the I know but you don't understand. That just right there, I think speaks volumes to what that means now, is because you're essentially showing people that it sounds to me like when people first talk to you, they say, oh, I know this, but then you help them understand what it is they know to get past this. So let us know what happened to that. Unfold the rest of that story when he opened up shop and finally let go after that vacation, and kind of how that thread is common to people that do that.
Well, the thing is that he'd already had the idea, right? They'd already even looked at properties and stuff like that. That's how it was so easy for him to step into it. So what he didn't understand is that the ideas he was not following through on were causing the exhaustion, the callbacks, which equals loss of money, the lack of time, so that he wasn't sleeping because he was working so hard, so many hours, and our productivity is so low. So he had these ideas. So when he took that vacation that I prescribed for them, then he had some time to just de-stress. And then those ideas came to the surface again. And because we were working together, then he knew he was going to have the support to keep on moving through. So moved into this place. He had to hire, I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 more people instantly. Business was coming to them because all the people in the community were now seeing their sign downtown as they were driving around. So everything just, it blossomed, if you will. So it's kind of like, I'm seeing a plant here, but it's like you keep cutting the plant off and you keep cutting it off. And now finally you're giving it all the nutrients, all the sunshine, just the right amount of water that it needs. And it's just blossoming so quickly. That's what happened to the business.
That's amazing how that works out. And, it's a theme, and I've talked about it before, that there's some people that when they think about, getting a shop, moving out of the house and getting a shop, hiring 2 more people, the 2 different mindsets are, and I think this is really the difference between an entrepreneurial mindset and someone that's a slave to traditional, lifestyle is, there's some people, and it sounds like this is what you are just brilliant in getting people over, is thinking that spending the money on getting that shop, spending the money and hiring additional people. I think it comes down to your ability to shift their mindset from that being an expense or that being where their money is going to go to that is where their money is going to come from.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And something that people always say, before they've been working with me is, I can't afford that cost. That costs too much. Well, to me, a cost, if you're talking cost, that tells me that you believe that is a loss of money. You're going to put that money out and that's it. It's gone. Where in fact, it's an investment, and an investment in that shop downtown, that nice, beautiful place that they furnished and all that stuff. And the new people they hired on, they're investments because that's where their money was coming from.
Yeah. And I think that's what people find when they work with you is, there's people that would like, well, if I work with, the Lynne at MLJ, well, that's something I need to chalk up. I got to budget that as a cost. Where's that money going to come from? But it seems like, from looking at your business and looking at what your client success has been, is it turns out that MLJ is where a grid of my revenue since then has come because of the things that we've implemented through that. And I have to say, seeing your success and seeing the success of your businesses, and I'm talking about businesses, like we talked about, brick and mortar, construction, heating and cooling. We're not talking about big, sexy, businesses. We're talking about businesses that people run every day, people that start these businesses as mom and pop shops that grow them into something really remarkable, that just recognize and overcome these challenges that are inherent to growing a business and recognize them as part of growing, it really is, I think, is what puts you in that influencer category, because you've influenced a lot of people to go above and beyond where they probably were, where they thought they were capable of going, or to that place where they saw potential when they started that business, but lost that hope and that fun. So that truly makes you an influencer. And what I like to find out is what influences the influencer. What is it that influences you, inspires you, that allows that enters into your work and keeps you going and doing what you're doing?
Well, one of the things I do is I work with a coach for myself, for my own business. More of a mentor type of coach, to constantly be learning more. I call it continuing education. My first life was in the field of law, and that was just one of the categories that we called it, was continuing education. And that's what I find is so essential for me. And the book that I've probably only studied about 10 or 11 times now, but I'm still going through it, is Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill.
The classic.
Telling you, first time I heard about that book, I detested it. That was way back when I was an employee and, very young babies, and I now have grandchildren. But that book, since I started studying it about 6 years ago or so, I just live by it. And another one that I really enjoy too is The Science of Getting Rich by Wallace Wattles. And it's a science. And it's all, it applies to everybody. And I can tell you that when I study that book with my clients in certain programs, not everybody, I don't study that with everybody, but in certain programs, they argue, they roll their eyes, they resist. And then they go, it's true. It really is. So it's all about the way it's our belief system, all about the way we think.
It is. The one thing, when we talk about coaching, I always tell people that if you're going to hire a coach, find out who their coach is, or at the very least, if they have a coach, and to not trust coaches that don't have coaches. Conventional wisdom says, well, if they're my coach, why do I want a coach that's paying someone to be their coach? It's like, that's exactly the coach you want, is someone that has coaches, because it all trickles down, I guess, is what you would call it. But they're fantastic, and I think those have certainly been the source of a lot of people's that are influencers out there. So Lynne, let me find out, how can people find out more about you, what MLJ International is doing, and how they could dig deeper into getting through these problems that may not really be problems, but just symptoms of success?
I love that, Jack. Symptoms of success. I do hope that it's okay with you if I start using that expression.
Absolutely.
So how can they, what should they do? I think they should just go to my website, send us an email, and we'll set up a time to have a chat. We'll just chat about their business and see which stage they're at and what it is maybe they're resisting stepping into, and what are some of the things that they need to change, because everything is so simple, as I talked about today. I mean, it's just so simple, it's almost laughable, and we do laugh about it a lot. From there, then we just take it from there and see whether us working together is the best next step for that person or not.
Well, fantastic. So what is the link? What's the best way for them to get there to?
Okay. It's mljinternational.com. mljinternational.com. And we'll also put this on the post with the where people can listen to, are listening to this right now on influencersradio.com. Lynne, I've got to say it has been a pleasure, and that's definitely, lets us see things that, a lot of people, it's tough. There's two symptoms, and I think when entrepreneurs, there's people from the outside looking in, and, I always say it's easy to count other people's money. People will look at someone and say, man, they've got it made. Look at that successful business. But on the inside, they're thinking, man, I've reached capacity. I can't scrub any harder, and I know there's more that can be had, but I've just hit the wall. And those two views can be had at the exact same point at a business. And it really is that business owners may start believing that they have hit that wall. And I think that you're able to kind of take those blinders off and realize that this isn't a wall. It's
it's paper at best if you just know how to break through it. So I've definitely appreciate you coming on and opening our eyes to that and removing those blinders, and definitely just glad to have you and Sharon for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jack. It has been my pleasure.
Well, fantastic, folks. Dig in, go and check out what Lynne Jacob is doing. And, until next time, remember, you are the real game changer. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to Influencers Radio. To get all past shows and updates on future shows, visit influencersradio.com today or follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/influencersradio.